Enlistment, Enoggera, and on to Egypt. In Brisbane, on Monday the 13th of December 1915, Jack was the first in line to enlist with his service number being 11249. Matt followed him as number 11250. The incentive for the boys to sign up may have come from the recent arrival of the Dungaree marchers in Brisbane on the 30th of November, 1915. The much publicised march had begun in Warwick at 10:30 a.m. on the 16th of November, with 28 recruits from the Stanthorpe and Warwick districts. The Warwick contingent led the march under a new Union Jack flag, presented by the Mayor of Warwick, while the Stanthorpe boys held a tattered and battle-stained flag, first hoisted by the 9th Battalion at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. Echoing a similar Snowball march held in New South Wales, the Cooey March, which had left Gilgandra with 25 men on the 10th of October, and arrived in Sydney on the 12th of November with 263 recruits. The March of the Dungarees had started with 28 men, wearing denim blue Dungaree uniforms with white linen hats. They marched through Clifton, Cambodia, Toowoomba, Helidon, Grantham, Gatton, Laidley, and Ipswich on their way, to finally culminate at a celebratory lunch at Old Government House in Brisbane, a distance of approximately 239 kilometres, where the final number of new recruits was recorded, according to the Telegraph newspaper in Brisbane, at 125 men. Whatever the reason for their decision, it found both Matt and Jack at the Brisbane recruiting depot in Adelaide Street, along with 76 other men, according to the Telegraph Brisbane, of which they and 63 more were accepted into the Australian Imperial Forces, the AIF. Jack's attestation papers gives his name as John Clark Sloan. The Clark in his name shows an additional E, instead of the CLARK spelling used by his father, John Clark Sloan Sr. He was born on the Orkney Islands, Scotland. Jack's age is given as 18 years and 9 months, and his trade was as a labourer. He had previously served 12 months in the cadets of the 8th Infantry Regiment. He was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds, with a chest measurement of 32 to 34 inches. Fair of both hair and complexion, his eyes were grey. He stated he was of the Presbyterian faith. On Matt's attestation papers, he noted that his birthplace was the same as Jack's, that being the Orkney Islands. However, his birth certificate shows that he was born at Glenboig in Scotland, and that his father J.C. Sloan Sr. was at that time a clay pit miner. Matt's age was given as 21 years and 1 month, and his trade, perhaps a little exaggerated, was stated as a local preacher. Although Matt had wanted to study to become a minister, at that time he was employed as a farm labourer in the Kingaroy district. Later in life, he acted as a lay preacher, and he may well have also been acting in a similar capacity as this, during this time, before enlistment. He had declared his previous military service as 4 years in the militia, with the Australian Light Horse, in both Brisbane and Kingaroy. No records have been found about his Brisbane service. However, he was in C Troop, C Squadron, of the 1st Central Queensland Light Horse at Kingaroy. Matt's height was given as 5 feet 9.5 inches and he weighed 125 pounds, with a chest measurement of between 32.5 and 34.5 inches. Matt was of a fair complexion, with hazel eyes and black hair. He stated that he was of the Methodist faith. Enoggera. During the First World War, Brisbane's Enoggera camp served as the primary training ground for Queensland recruits. Established originally as a defence training area before Federation, the camp expanded rapidly after 1914 to accommodate the influx of volunteers. By the end of 1915, the sites at Bells, Fraser's, and Thompson's Paddocks had become tented cities, equipped with horse lines, parade grounds, rifle ranges, and facilities. Matt and Jack's attestation papers record their initial posting to the Australian Army Medical Corps Depot, Brisbane. This unit was commonly called the No. 1 Depot Company, AMC. Its primary role was to process Medical Corps recruits, clerks, stretcher bearers, drivers, orderlies, and nursing staff. Men assigned to No. 1 Depot Company received instruction in military drill, stretcher bearing, casualty handling, horse and wagon driving, and basic medical duties. Likely they would have also had exposure to motor transport, since drivers were increasingly trained on motor ambulances and supply vehicles. Matt and Jack would have experienced the routines of tented life, daily drills, and kit inspections. However, their time at Enoggera wasn't all just drills and inspections. They would also have had the opportunity to partake in a multitude of leisure activities. White City was a purpose-built entertainment and recreation precinct, right next to Enoggera Camp. It was designed so the soldiers, and sometimes civilians on open days, had a safe, organized space for leisure after training. While it served as a morale booster, it also kept the men occupied constructively, rather than wandering into Brisbane's pubs and possibly getting into mischief. By March 1916 it contained a gymnasium, for boxing, wrestling, and physical training, a boxing stadium that was electrically lit, and capable of seating thousands of soldiers for bouts and exhibitions, a band rotunda, for open-air concerts by military and civilian bands, a soda fountain, a non-alcoholic refreshment hall, a theatre and cinema, used for vaudeville-style concerts, moving picture shows and travelling companies, a restaurant, providing meals for soldiers and visitors, an alfresco auditorium, with open-air seating for up to 5,000 spectators, and a billiard room, where 6 full-size tables were installed. A newspaper clipping from the Daily Standard on the 21st of January 1916 reported on the opening of the new boxing stadium at Enoggera.
A monster gathering of members of the AIF witnessed the opening of the new boxing stadium at Enoggera, by the State Commandant Colonel G. L. Lee, DSO, last night. It was estimated that between 3,500 and 4,000 soldiers of all ranks were present, besides a number of representative civilian guests. The stadium platform is an ornate and commodious structure, with a pagoda roof, and brilliantly illuminated by electricity. It is equipped in every detail, and of substantial as well as neat design, and has a 19-foot 6-inch enclosure. Nearby, a fine elevated bandstand proves an acceptable adjunct, and last night was occupied by the Bell's Paddock AIF Band, under Sergeant Conductor Caves. The sitting accommodation is arranged in amphitheatre fashion, and when quite completed, will seat 3,000. Adjacent is spacious billiard rooms rapidly approaching completion, and in this, 6 tables will be installed. The stadium, billiard room, and other recreative fixtures had been built entirely out of canteen profits, coming wholly and solely from the men in the camp. It was their own contribution and one of which they might be proud. A lengthy program of boxing and sparring events followed. During the evening Bandmaster Caves sang his now famous song, "Boys of Australia," having lusty help in the chorus.
Matt and Jack would also have engaged in route marches, which were used for both training and recruitment purposes. The Brisbane Courier reported on a route march, of about 1,000 men, that took place from Enoggera to just beyond North Pine, where they bivouacked for the night. On the following morning, they headed for Sandgate, via Launton. The local ladies' committees provided refreshments, and in the evening they were entertained by a campfire concert. The men left on the return journey at 4:15, proceeding via Nudgee to Enoggera, reaching the camp at 8:15. The YMCA, Young Men's Christian Association, set up large marquee tents at Enoggera in 1915. These were funded by public subscription, church donations, and patriotic committees, reflecting Brisbane's support for the soldiers in camp. Their mission was to provide a home away from home, where soldiers could relax, write letters, read newspapers or donated books, play the piano or gramophone, play chess, draughts, or cards. Tea and other non-alcoholic drinks were served with biscuits. Sometimes religious services were held in the tent, as well as weekly concerts or lectures. No doubt, Matt and Jack would have run into their father, J.C. Sloan Sr., at the YMCA on numerous occasions. In this newspaper clipping, from the Telegraph Brisbane, it describes the YMCA riding tent being erected on the 31st of July 1915, although J.C. Sloan was not present at the time.
A new marquee for correspondence was placed in a new camp early in the week, and the men showed their appreciation when the marquee was opened for the first night by giving 3 cheers for the association. A new marquee was procured yesterday morning, and sent to the same camp, and being erected today, this will be used for entertainments, reading, games, and gospel meetings. Evangelist J.C. SLOAN, of the association's military staff, is still in the General Hospital. Meanwhile, his work at the camp is being carried on by friends of the soldiers.
Fortunately, for Matt and Jack, any entitled leave during their time at Enoggera could be spent at their family home at Mollinsburn, Lock Street, West End. Although the quality of these photographs are poor, they do represent a seemingly happy time in their backyard, prior to their leaving Australia. The very first Anzac Day parade was held on the 25th of April 1916, and occurred just weeks before their embarkation for overseas service. The proposal to commemorate the Anzacs at Gallipoli originated in Queensland and was quickly taken up by the other states. The troops marched out from Enoggera Army Camp, marking the first anniversary of the landing of the Australian and New Zealand troops on Gallipoli Peninsula. The General Post Office was the focal point for the Brisbane Anzac Day March. The saluting base of the military parade was in front of the GPO, and the Governor of Queensland, Major Sir Hamilton Goold-Adams, took the salute from a dais as the troops marched past. On the 4th of May, 1916, Matt and Jack embarked from Brisbane with the 18th Reinforcements, Lines of Communication, Army Medical Corps. This was their first operation unit abroad in Egypt and the Sinai. Pictured in the front row: John Clark Sloan, 11249, William Howard George Julian, 11242, Albert Angus Stewart, 11259. In the second row, Robert Ferguson, who has 2 service numbers, 11254 and 20893, Corporal William Smith, 11245, Sergeant Charles Love, 23, Cecil George Brighouse, 11251, Corporal Robert Lulham, 11241, Corporal Thomas Whiteman Nash, 11258, Archie Black McLean, 11257. On the third row, William Barbrick Morris, 11256, William Franklin Jameson, 11247, Matthew Black Sloan, 11250, Frederick Thomas Moore, 11246, George Harold Percy Whiston, 3005, and Patrick Joseph Kelly, 11248. In the top row, James William Ives, 11244, Emmett Drew Walker, 11260, Thomas William Fraser, 11253, Harold Garland Nilable, 11255, Robert Seaton, 11243. Missing from the photo is Walter Spore Staff Smith, 11252. Of the 18th Reinforcements, Brighouse, Staff Smith, Fraser, Ferguson, Nilable, Morris, McLean, Nash, Stewart, and Walker all sailed earlier from Pinkenba on the HMAT A49 Clan MacGillivray on the 1st of May 1916. This left Lulham, Julian, Seaton, Ives, Smith, Moore, Jameson, and Kelly to embark with Matt and Jack on the Seang Choon 3 days later. They departed Pinkenba Wharf with a large contingent of 18th Reinforcements of the 15th Battalion, Australian Imperial Forces, the AIF. These photos probably comprised Matt's first correspondence home to his mother, and his then sweetheart, Eva Perrott. They were taken from on board the Seang Choon as it was departing. Matt is holding the Red Cross flag, marked with an X on the photos. Although his arrival in Egypt was a couple of weeks earlier, Private Edgar Percy Wright, 4865, wrote home about his departure.
The huge ship weighed anchor and began to move off. Here a beautiful sight was presented by the thousands of different colored streamers which were passed from soldier to civilian, on the wharf, and gradually unwound as the ship moved out, and at last broke, leaving part of the streamer in the hand of each party for a keepsake and memento of the occasion.
Anecdotally, a second cousin once shared with me, that Eva Perrott, on receipt of advice that Matt was embarking for Egypt, had made a dash to Brisbane, from Coolangatta, to see him off. The writing on the postcard to her does not indicate that she was present on the day. It is however clear that they did meet up at some time before he proceeded overseas, as he gave her this locket to remember him by. Records for the Seang Choon's crossing to Egypt between May and July were not complete. They do state the embarkation is May the 5th with a destination of Hobart, departing there on the 8th of May. After this entry, there is no records of the remainder of the journey or the arrival at port said. The usual crossing of troop ships would have a docking in ports at both Fremantle and Colombo, to take on coal and provisions for the next leg of the journey. Matt and Jack's crossing would, however, have been similar to that of Private Edgar Percy Wright's described in his letter home.
We saw the last of our Australians at the heads on the Pilot as we sailed away, and at last disappeared on the horizon. Sad, but we could not feel sorry, knowing the immediate need of our services on the other side, and the call for help from our brother soldier boys there. Meals on board principally were made of boiled rabbit, potatoes, bread and tea, with sometimes mutton, butter, or cheese. After 6 days' sail we arrived at Albany, and stayed there 2 days coaling and taking in a good supply of water. No leave was allowed the men here, but I sent several letters by the coal lumpers to post. After another 10 days' sail we drew into Port Colombo. Here we had a route march through the city and finally to the barracks. Had some good sport here making bargains, and had plenty of fruit, bananas, pineapples, coconuts, etc. Some of the men bought monkeys for mascots. Very pretty scenery in the surroundings of Colombo. There were a great many ships in the harbour, a few battleships, but mostly transports heavily loaded with troops, some French, Indian, etc., also a few captured vessels. We were in Colombo 3 days coaling. The difference here between our time and Sydney is 6 hours. The weather is very hot, and tucker pretty crook, and it's no easy matter to satisfy one's appetite. We had different duties en route, such as sweeping the deck, hoisting goods up to the canteen, water guard, hammock guard, washing steps, getting into lifebelts, and physical drill and exercises. The heat was now very oppressive, and there was a great rush for men to sleep on deck when hammocks were given out at 7 o'clock. We were inoculated twice on board. We arrived at Port Suez, and entered the canal. The canal is about 100 yards wide, and every mile or so, it is widened out to allow ships to pass. The banks of the channel are mostly only a few feet above the water level, and off the deck, one can get a good view across the sandy desert. On either side of the canal there are hundreds of Tommies and Australians camped, being permanently stationed here to guard the canal against attack. Viewed from the fore of the deck, the canal very much resembles a well-made main road, and the ship has to travel very slowly. As the soldiers see her coming they all run down to the bank and follow her along, shouting, "Who are you? Where do you come from? How did you leave Australia? You'll be sorry," etc. Thousands of them were enjoying a swim in the channel. Next morning we were ordered to disembark. The news was greeted with cheers by all hands. So after a loud cheer for the 3 nurses, and a unanimous hoot for the cooks, the barges moved us slowly to the shore.